As my husband saw my late father's house where we were residing, he made the self-centered declaration, "I'm going to make my father-in-law's house mine. Can you really not understand anything?" My husband made a trite comment that made me laugh out loud. As my revenge cornered my husband's family, who I had long misjudged, I, Katie Manning, couldn't help but think back on all the events that had brought us to this point. Since my mother passed away when I was a high school student, I had been living with my father and my spouse, Ben. I have always had a strong bond with my father because he showed me unending love throughout my upbringing. Ben embraced the notion of the three of us sharing our house when I suggested we move in with my increasingly unsettling father. "Are you truly comfortable with this? I am capable of taking care of myself," my father worriedly questioned over the suggestion of cohabitation. He grinned broadly at first when I offered that we live together, but then his expression turned apprehensive. "I'm always worried I might be a burden to you," he remarked. My father was always sensitive to my emotions, but when I said I wanted to remain with him and Ben said sure, my dad grinned and accepted. I was moving into my childhood house with Ben today. We started opening the boxes the movers had brought. I responded, "Haven't I always said this is what I wanted?" "You're correct, Dad," we said. "Plus, this location has better access to work, which is also convenient for me," and my father nodded slightly. We discovered my father had made coffee for us after we had unpacked. I heard footsteps coming downstairs just as I was ready to take a break for coffee. "I made some for you too, because I figured you might want a break," my father remarked. Ben and I had a great time spending a break with him, full of gratitude for his gracious hospitality and optimism for a richer life ahead. We took a quick break and then started unloading again, pulling up our sleeves for more work. "Hey, you can quit your work if you so choose," Ben suddenly suggested. "It's okay to stay and support your father," which startled me and caused me to pause. "Explain what you mean." "Consider it. We've reduced our rent costs since coming back here, right? It could be better if you left your job to take care of your father and worry less, right?" Ben recommended. Ben occasionally assisted me with household duties, but at the moment we were both employed. Our days continued to be very hectic. Ben's offer intrigued me, and I thought about it, excited at the possibility of spending more time with my father. Furthermore, it appeared that concentrating on housework might lessen stress on the body as well as the mind. Although Ben's idea was incredibly enticing, I was concerned since it would require me to become financially dependent on him. Though grateful that he agreed to live with me, I wondered if I could continue to rely on Ben. We made the decision to carry on as usual for the time being despite the change in our living situation. "I don't want you to overdo it," Ben remarked, but I felt that I couldn't always rely on Ben because I was the one who proposed cohabitation. A month elapsed. Ben made the same suggestion, saying, "Hey, maybe quitting your job for your father's sake is the best after all." It might be the best course of action, I thought. My daily burden had unexpectedly decreased since we moved in together, mostly because my father took on a lot of the housework. When I got home, my dad had already fixed dinner and cleaned the house. However, this seemed to add to his workload, which made me feel bad and consider quitting my work to help with the housework. Yes, I might carry that out. "Ben, I apologize for placing financial strain on you." "What are you considering? That is not a cause for concern." After hearing those remarks, I decided to resign from my position. My father encouraged me to carry on working and delegate the domestic tasks to him once I informed him about my plan. But once I told him I wanted to pitch in with the housework, he got it. I made the decision to resign from my work in order to focus entirely on our house, which allowed me to spend more happy days with my father. But with time, things started to shift in our life. "I'm here," I would declare. "Ben, welcome back." I would say to him, "It must have been a difficult day." He'd say, "Yo, is dinner ready?" The chances of us having dinner together decreased as Ben's return home became later and later. By the time he returned, my father had already fallen asleep. Ben said, "Can you keep it down?" when he got home one evening while my dad and I were watching TV. "I'm consuming food." "I apologize," I answered. Ben was still kind as ever when my father was around, but lately he's been very distant from me when we're alone. I felt that my leaving my work had put him under further strain, and all I could do was apologize. I started to make Ben his favorite drink for the evening after he finished his dinner, but he got up to leave the dining room. "Where are you heading? How's your beverage doing?" "I'm going to take a bath," he curtly said before making his exit. These were the days when I could only sigh, whether it was because he was cranky or just exhausted. My father had gone to bed the following day, and I was waiting for Ben to come home. He was still not home till after midnight. I tried phoning him out of concern, but I got no answer. An email arrived right as I was beginning to freak out, fearing something had happened. "How come?" The icy text appeared to say exactly how he felt. I sighed, but was also pleased he was safe. "I'm still working." I said, "I was worried because it's late." He swiftly answered, "On a business trip." I knew after those few words that he wouldn't be returning home this evening. I was unaware of the trip and hoped he had notified me sooner, but saying it could make him even more irritated. "You're traveling for business, then?" "I understand. How much time will you be away?" I sent this mail, but it was not answered. Ben stopped informing me when he would go on business trips and when he would return home. When Ben was home, my father would inquire about the problem in an attempt to be considerate. "No problem," he would reply, his smile no longer seeming to be intended at me. "I am doing great effort for our family." I could tell by his response that he wasn't happy with me. Whenever I proposed we communicate, he would respond with something like, "I'm just busy," or "I'm tired, let's talk later." We never got down to a real conversation. Ben eventually stopped going home very often. I started to suspect that he might be having an affair as my mistrust of him grew. My mother-in-law sent me a message out of the blue that said, "I need the address of the company Ben works for." It was a simple one-line email with no salutations. We had a natural barrier between us because my in-laws had not been fond of me since the start of our marriage, calling me names and doing nasty things to me. Ben was aware of this, and while it never made our relationship any better, it also didn't become any better, so we kept our distance. When my mother-in-law sent me this unexpected email, I thought about what she was trying to say before responding. "It's been a while. Could you tell me why you require Ben's work address?" She seemed irritated after I sent this reply since I got an irate call right away. "Hi there. It has been some time." Nothing like "it's been a while." Ben is taking care of your father because you quit your work and don't do anything at home. How are you able to do that? He's back at our house now because of you. I'm trying to send his lunchbox because he went to the office today and forgot it. In response to this mindset, what steps will you take? It cannot be excused. Please provide me the address at once. Ben will now be residing at our home. My mother-in-law's irate remarks stunned me to the point of inarticulation. Ben had actually gone back to his parents' house on the days he had claimed to be abroad on business. It shocked me to learn how my in-laws talked about me. Ben had stated that it would be acceptable for me to resign from my position, but I had the uneasy feeling that his actual goals were different. I was so sad that I thought I would never stop crying. I just gave Ben his work address without debating and hung up. In the living room, I poured myself some coffee in an attempt to relax. I smiled as usual and asked my father if he would like some coffee when he walked in. He gave me a quick glance, grinned back, and nodded. While sipping our coffee, my father began to discuss the past. "When we were younger, your mom and I used to fight a lot. We had a lot of miscommunications, but we always made an effort to be truthful with one another, and it helped us to resolve a lot of problems." Warmly, he remarked, Couples who can fight and then work things out might understand each other better and grow stronger. His words struck a deep chord with me, and I made the decision to speak with Ben in earnest. "It's accurate, Dad." I told him thank you, and he smiled back at me. I then emailed Ben, giving him the details of my chat with his mother and letting him know that I was eager to speak with him. But Ben answered dismissively, which caused me to sigh deeply. I started to become angry with Ben. In my agitated state, I wanted to reply right away, but I forced myself to calm down by taking a big breath. Ben stopped making financial contributions to our household as a result of this circumstance. Messages regarding living expenses were ignored, and attempts to get in touch with him were received with silence. Because of his self-centered actions, my love for him progressively waned. I was thinking about getting a divorce since I didn't see any purpose in our marriage. Ben's recklessness and self-centeredness disappointed me, but I made the decision to put off talking about divorce and sustain myself with my pre-marriage monies since I didn't want to worry my father anymore. I started to enjoy my days with my father when I got used to Ben's absence until he unexpectedly fell. We were informed he didn't have much time left as he was rushed to the hospital. I was so overcome with emotion that I was unable to hear the nurses or physicians. He tried to grin as he went to my father's room to apologize for worrying me. I smiled back, holding his hand, and said, "Don't worry, you'll get better," even though my eyes were watering. Seeing my father, he asked, "What's with that face?" and laughed while maintaining a dejected expression. Tears were forming in my eyes once more. I had to go back home momentarily to get everything ready for the hospital stay. But when I went back to my childhood house by myself, I felt so alone that I started crying uncontrollably. Even though I had moved out when I got married, this house, where I had spent my formative years, was still home to many of my childhood memories. I would just cry all the time, unable to handle the loneliness of being by myself. Ben sent me a chilly note during this trying period, saying, "Since we're living apart, take care of your own bills. Use your father-in-law's pension, perhaps." I was so frustrated that I hurled my phone at this. That was when all my affections for Ben disappeared. I was shaken by grief and rage and understood it was a waste of time to think about how I felt about Ben. My thoughts was eased by wondering how my father would react to seeing me in this state. I straightened up, cleaned my face, and got ready to head to the hospital. Right at that moment, I got some excellent news in the mail that might make things better for me. When I saw this, I decided what to do. I hurried to the hospital, leaving the documents at home for the time being. As my father's health deteriorated over time, I had to come to terms with the fact that it was almost time for us to part ways. At the hospital, happy days were spent having chats, but when I got home, I started crying. My father eventually went away quietly. I was there to see him go in peace, but I was so overcome with grief that I started crying. But my father left behind an immense legacy that will always hold a special place in my heart. With the assistance of family, the funeral was well organized. Nevertheless, Ben and my in-laws did not arrive until the very end. I hadn't told them of my father's death in advance, so I hadn't planned on them coming. Still, it appears they had heard about his passing via family members, since, just a few days after resolving the estate and legal matters, Ben showed up out of the blue carrying a ton of stuff. "A long time has passed. I have learned about your father's passing." I felt a surge of rage at seeing Ben's face, but I forced myself to calm down and inhaled deeply. "What would you like? What's going on with the bags? Isn't it a little severe for a husband coming back home? Oh, this luggage contains items from my folks." I thought Ben's use of the word husband to be really aggravating. After he left the house, stopped paying for living expenses, and lived as he pleased, his words were meaningless to me. It was somewhat unexpected that he was now claiming to be a husband. Your material is structured and punctuated into smaller paragraphs below. It was jarring. I was at a loss for words. "Were you waiting for me? Jobless, struggling with living expenses, and left alone to care for your father. Happy? Are you so happy you're speechless? No, it seems I was the one caught in your plan. Ben's mention of a plane caught my attention, prompting me to ask for clarification. The answer I received was unbelievable. Living with an old man was something I couldn't accept. Impossible to live with the elderly, but saying that might make you think about divorce. If we divorced, I couldn't get this house, so I chose to live together and pushed you into unemployment by pretending to be the ideal husband, making you dependent on me and the elderly man. That way, the house would become mine. Hearing his words, I found myself glaring at Ben sharply. This was not normal thinking. Reflecting on our marriage made me despise myself and feel deep guilt toward my father. I struggled to contain my trembling. Your story doesn't add up. You're the one who left and stopped paying the living expenses. When I pointed this out, Ben scratched his head in annoyance. Yeah, I had reached my limit. I didn't realize I was so short-tempered, but I thought the plan would work even without me. I assumed you wouldn't have the courage to bring up divorce. His smug smile made me forget what had ever attracted me to him. I no longer wanted to see his face or hear his voice. My feelings toward Ben had become unbearable. The plan worked. This house might be old, but it's spacious and well located. It'll be worth a lot when sold. From today, my parents and I will live here. Could there be anyone more self-centered? It seemed morality was foreign to him, which wasn't surprising considering his parents. As I stood dumbfounded, he continued to insult me further. The house of your father is mine. Get out. Watching my in-laws' belongings being moved in, I realized Ben was completely oblivious to the situation. Ben looked down on me confidently, disrespecting my father and making it impossible to leave things as they were. Seeing Ben standing there so smugly made me burst into laughter, unable to hold it back. My sudden laughter confused Ben. Have you lost your mind? That's the perfect description for you, I replied, the thought of confronting him with reality making my laughter uncontrollable. Seeing me laugh, Ben became furious. However, ignoring his reaction, I laid out the reality. Don't you know this is my house? It could never become yours. Surprised and frozen by my words, I continued. Besides, you and I are now unrelated. Didn't your mother tell you? Laughing as I said this, Ben seemed utterly stunned. He immediately started contacting someone on his smartphone, apparently his mother. Mom, Katie's saying something weird. We haven't divorced, have we? I could hear his mother say she hadn't heard anything from him. What do you mean? You sent it? Really? How did this happen? Watching Ben's speechless reaction, it seemed he finally grasped the situation. After ending the call, Ben's expression was twisted, as if he was looking at something incomprehensible. Did you really submit a divorce application? He asked. Yes, I did. The day your father was taken to the hospital, your mother sent me a completed divorce form by post, which I happily submitted the next day. Your mother has her moments, doesn't she? I replied. Damn it, even if it arrived, you weren't supposed to submit it. It was something my mother made me write just in case, not intending to actually divorce. Ben was furious. But you filled it out yourself, didn't you? Whether or not you intended to doesn't matter. I completed the divorce process as you wished, so you should be thanking me. I calmly retorted, seeing Ben frustrated. I felt a sense of relief inside. The divorce form from my mother-in-law might have been intended as harassment, but for me, wanting a divorce, it was a stroke of luck. Later, Ben anxiously questioned me about property division and the house's ownership, but I dismissed his concerns. It was clear there were no significant assets to divide, so I informed him there was no need for division. I explained that due to the short cohabitation period with my father and the assets being in my father's name at the time of the divorce, they were not subject to division. Ben insisted on a financial demand, claiming even my savings from before marriage should be split, but I informed him his claims had no basis. He turned pale, attempting to argue, but only opening and closing his mouth, resembling a fish out of water. Though tempted to mock him, I chose to maintain a mature demeanor and calm myself. "Letton, send this here," I said. "It's problematic for someone to bring their belongings into another person's home uninvited, which clearly constitutes trespassing. If you plan to stay any longer, I'll have to call the police." As I said this, Ben hurriedly gathered his belongings and left. I spread salt at the entrance and prayed to my parents' portraits. "This is for the best. I'll become stronger, so please watch over me." Thinking of my parents meeting again in heaven eased my loneliness and lightened my heart. Emboldened by this new resolve, I began looking for a job. It was then that a friend contacted me, knowing I was job hunting, and offered to introduce me to a job that matched my expertise. Thanks to their recommendation, I quickly secured a position. After an interview with HR, a few days later, I received a message from Ben. "Sorry for being stubborn the other day. Actually, I wanted to start over with you, which is why I came to the house." Finding the message unbelievable, I struggled with how to reply, but ultimately decided to ignore it. Yet Ben continued to send poetic messages like a relentless suitor. "Once we were like the sun and the moon. Days spent longing for you, unreachable, are now behind us. Now we can be closer. Without your love, I'm nothing. Won't you give me your overflowing love once more? I'll dedicate everything to you. I treasure you more than anything. Our love will last forever. No matter where I am, I'll continue to love you, for your heart is my home." Each time I received these poetic messages, I shared them with colleagues, wondering if they could serve as material for work. Currently working as an illustrator in a cartoon editorial department, these emails sometimes prove to be useful inspiration. "Look, the melodramatic stalker is back. It's great to have something to laugh about in tough times." Unknowingly, Ben has become a source of amusement. Feeling only discomfort from his messages, I've been avoiding replying. Amid these days, the doorbell at my home rang. Looking through the peephole, I saw Ben standing outside. I had never expected him to show up in person, so I decided to call the police immediately. "Hey, I know you're in there. I can see your car. Please just listen to me. I'm really in trouble right now. There was talk of moving into this house, so my parents sold their home. Now I have nowhere to go. Help me." I could hear his voice shouting from outside, but what does that have to do with me? It highlights his recklessness for not correcting the situation when they misunderstood this house as their own. His emails showed he hadn't given up, but I was merely astonished by his and his family's naive thinking. While the police were convincing Ben to leave, he resisted strongly but was eventually taken away. After that, when there was no response to the flood of Romeo emails, contacts from my in-laws began. At first, they tried calling, but when I ignored that, they switched to emails. How can you know we're in a difficult situation and not offer any help? You should contact us immediately. Why not have a serious discussion? We were once a family. Isn't it too cruel to be so indifferent? You caused us to lose our home. Now we live in a dilapidated apartment. Why won't you hand over the house? You must have received inheritance from your father. You're not struggling financially. We quit our jobs. You should take responsibility. If the child is like this, of course the parents are too. Do they think their decisions will always prevail? I was infuriated by the audacious emails. How can they disregard others to such an extent? Although I intended to ignore them, I ended up blocking Ben and my in-laws' contacts. I considered changing my contact information, but it felt ridiculous to spend money just because of them. I was determined to ignore them, but I reached my limit. I optimistically thought blocking them would restore my peace, but soon realized my approach was short-sighted. One day, my former in-laws showed up at my doorstep. Despite being fed up with their endless harassment, understanding they knew my address made me realize such incidents were inevitable. However, I did not want to leave this house, filled with many memories. Come out. You know we're in trouble. Change your mood. I'm proposing we get back together. Accept it. How can you ignore someone in trouble? What kind of human does that? The doorbell and knocking were incessant, but I did not hesitate to call the police. Suddenly, the noise from outside stopped. Peeking through the peephole, I saw an unfamiliar man arguing with my former in-laws. Go home. You're bothering people. The sudden appearance of the man puzzled my former in-laws. What did you say? Who are you? Could it be an affair partner? Unfazed by their backlash, the man looked at them coldly. Your attitude is the problem. Look around. This is a residential area. Look, people are gathering because of you. You're really causing a disturbance. Indeed, through the limited view of the peephole, I could see neighbors gathering, which felt somewhat embarrassing. However, seeing my former family stuttering as they fled was a relief. When the police arrived, it seemed one of the officers had encountered this scene before, saying to Ben, "It's you guys again." Hearing this, my former in-laws' faces turned red. How much trouble are you going to cause? Get some awareness. I silently thanked the man as he walked away, relieved. Afterward, my former in-laws were taken away in a police vehicle, and the onlookers dispersed. Hours later, the doorbell rang again. Peering through the peephole, I saw the man from the earlier argument standing there. Surprised to see him, I hesitated before cautiously opening the door. The man greeted me with a warm smile. It's been a while. If you were back, you should have let me know. I recognized his face, but I couldn't immediately recall who he was until he reintroduced himself. Don't tell me you've forgotten. It's been over 10 years after all. Remember me, I'm Scott. Hearing his name, memories flooded back. Scott, my childhood friend, known as Scotty in our hometown. Scotty, now that you mention it, you really are Scotty. Scott used to live next door, and we hadn't seen each other since changing elementary schools. Finally remembered, he asked. I've moved back to the area. We're neighbors again. It's really been a long time, and thank you for earlier. It meant a lot to me. After expressing my gratitude, Scott just laughed it off, making me smile too. We caught up on old times, and I ended up telling him about the recent disturbances. Scott proved to be a trustworthy buddy by keeping his word to help me out whenever I needed it. Scott offered to pay his respects after learning of my father's demise and recalled him from our early years. Having someone who was familiar with my past brought me great joy. After a few days, I unexpectedly received a notification in the form of a letter from a legal firm. When I opened the unexpected letter, I saw that it demanded money in damages, alleging that I had cheated on my spouse. Startled by the circumstances, I looked at my smartphone and saw a message from an unfamiliar email address that said, regarding the notification. The message said, "Your ex-husband Ben has filed a lawsuit, alleging that you were unfaithful to him throughout your marriage. By acknowledging this and handling it directly, you can prevent the situation from getting worse. We're going to let your workplace know. Given your future, we suggest that you resolve this issue as soon as possible." It was obvious that this was a plot by my ex-in-laws rather than a legitimate court notice, as it implied a threat. After scrutinizing the notification more closely, I began to question its veracity, which led me to seek legal advice from an actual attorney. The attorney verified that the paper was fraudulent and that the purported attorney's name was not on file. I replied, knowing better than to argue with them, offering to look into their allegations, but demanding proof of my alleged adultery. We are seeking compensation for the significant mental distress that Ben is alleged to have experienced. They responded without providing any concrete evidence. Legal experts didn't seem to be involved in such irrational allegations. I claim there is no evidence since I did not commit adultery. It's difficult to accept that experts would step in on the basis of such baseless allegations. Would you not concur? Inspired by Ben's zeal, we want to help him. We really hope for your collaboration. I have no intention of taking this issue any further. Very sentimental approach for a professional, I must say. Are you aware that pretending to be a lawyer is against the law and subject to punishment? Just to be sure, do you have the necessary credentials? Their usually fast reactions were interrupted by this question. I was curious about what would happen next until I got a new email that said, "I am a professional, but your arguments were unbeatable. We've made the decision to drop the litigation." I have no passion for this topic and am quite calm about being wrongly accused of adultery. Therefore, there is no reason for me to withdraw. I'm excited to face this driven attorney in court and plan to legally refute this. There was no more communication after this exchange, but the quiet did not stay long because my ex-in-laws visited my home once more. They began bellowing at the front door, even though it was late at night. "We erred in judgment. Please don't bring the case against us." The sound woke me up, and when I looked at the time, it was after 1:00 a.m. When my rage about not getting enough sleep peaked, I yelled, "Please be quiet. Give up bothering me." My ex-in-laws were shocked to see me so upset because they had never seen me like this before. "I won't ignore it if you get any closer and start causing more trouble." My ex-in-laws' emotions altered dramatically after making that vow and taking hold of my father's wooden sword, especially Ben's, who appeared to shiver in dread. "We're so sorry," whistling they begged. "You ought to have behaved differently right away." I reprimanded, "If you were sorry, don't come before me ever again." My ex-mom-in-law gave a nod, her eyes welling with tears. Then I noticed a patrol car approaching us and its lights. Owing to the late hour, it appeared that their neighbors had denounced them, and the officers who arrived took my ex-in-laws away right away. They attempted to use a wooden sword to attack me. My ex-mom-in-law gestured at me and called the police, but she was removed. I told the police that I had taken the wooden sword for self-defense because the doorbell was ringing and someone was knocking on the door at this hour. The police then inquired as to whether this was true. They gave a sympathetic nod. With me at my side, Scott informed the authorities about what he had seen, repeated visits from the former in-laws. After hearing his evidence, the police judged their conduct to be malicious and removed my former in-laws, bringing the tranquility to an end. I filed a report with several events involving the police the following day as advised by Scott. Everything went according to plan. Scott said he had heard me yelling the night before and was about to comment about the assault by the ex-in-laws. He said my voice sounded terrible. My previous in-laws were later the subject of a restraining order, and they never bothered me again. Additionally, the disturbance was captured on camera, and the video surfaced online, making them the neighborhood's whispery talk of the town. They're probably surviving off of the retirement assets of their previous in-laws, as they were unable to relocate owing to financial constraints. In my case, Scott and I got closer quickly, and after we were reunited a few months later, he declared his love, and we began dating. I always feel joyful when I spend time with Scott because he makes me grin. I'm grateful that things turned out the way they did because I believe my father gave me this gift.